Does God exist? In this intense debate, a theist and an atheist with completely opposing worldviews face off against each other. Each presents their arguments and beliefs in an attempt to win over 5 judges. Judges who are neither human nor biased, but AI models, precise, logical, and ruthlessly analytical. To fully understand the arguments and the final outcome, please watch the video from beginning to end without skipping ahead. Question 1. Is it possible to prove the existence of God?
Let's first clarify what we mean by proof. We can't put God in a laboratory and look at him under a microscope. God is not a material being, so direct scientific methods can't be used to observe him. But reason and logic can lead us to conclude that God's existence is the most rational explanation for certain things in the world. For example, think about this. Why does anything exist at all? Why do we have a vast and orderly universe instead of nothing? If everything has a cause, then ultimately we must arrive at something that itself has no cause, something eternal and unchanging. Many people call this being God. This is known as the argument from causation. Or consider the amazing order and lawfulness of nature. From the structure of a cell to the motion of the planets, everything is precise and orderly. Could all of this really have come about by chance and randomness? Or is it more reasonable to believe that an intelligent designer is behind this order? This is known as the argument from design. So even though we can't see God like we see physical objects, our reason and intellect can regard his existence as a very strong, logical, and justified hypothesis.
The average score obtained by the believer in God, 9.04.
The fact that we cannot see or measure God is itself a major problem. Science deals with things that can be observed, measured, or tested. For example, we don't directly see electrons, but we can measure their effects. In contrast, God has no effect that can be clearly and testably identified. We must be careful not to conclude, therefore God exists, just because we don't understand something. In philosophy, this is called the God of the gaps argument. The idea that whenever we encounter something we don't understand, we attribute it to God. But this kind of thinking holds back scientific progress. For instance, people once thought thunder and lightning were acts of the gods, but now we know they're caused by electricity. Moreover, things like the order of nature or the origin of the universe today have largely scientific explanations. The Big Bang for the beginning of the universe, or Darwinian evolution for the complexity of living beings. We don't have all the answers yet, but that's not a good reason to insert God into the gaps of our knowledge. In my view, if God cannot be seen, tested, or identified through any specific effects, then belief in him is more of a personal or emotional matter, not something that can be logically and universally proven through reason.
The average score obtained by the atheist, 9.16. Question 2. If God exists, why is there so much suffering, injustice, disease, and misery in the world?
This question is one of the oldest and most important questions people have about God. If God truly exists, and if he is kind, all-knowing, and powerful, then why does he allow human beings to suffer, children to fall ill, or injustice and war to exist in the world? In philosophy, this is known as the problem of evil. Many people believe this issue is incompatible with the existence of God. However, there are responses to this challenge that many philosophers find logical and convincing. One of the most important responses relates to human free will. If God had not created humans with freedom, we would be like robots. But real freedom means that humans are capable of making bad choices. Much of the evil in the world, wars, poverty, injustice, is the result of human decisions, not the actions of God. If God were to prevent all these wrongs, then human freedom and responsibility would no longer exist. As for natural suffering, like earthquakes, illness, or the death of children, the answers are more complex. Some argue that such suffering is part of our imperfect world and only makes sense when seen alongside the good. We grow through hardship. Love, sacrifice, empathy, and faith all gain meaning in the context of suffering. For example, someone who survives cancer or someone who helps others despite living in poverty often develops a profound inner strength. It should also be remembered that from a religious perspective, this world is temporary. The sufferings of this life, seen from an eternal viewpoint, are like fleeting moments and will be compensated in the afterlife. If we only look at this world, suffering may seem meaningless, but in a broader view, it can be seen as part of a larger story.
The average score obtained by the believer in God, 9.18.
The fact that the world is full of pain, disease, and injustice, in my view, is one of the strongest reasons to doubt the existence of a God who is loving and all-knowing. If I had the power to save a child from cancer and chose not to, people would call me cruel. So why doesn't God stop the suffering of the innocent when He has the power? The explanation that suffering leads to human growth or human freedom causes evil might make sense in some cases, but it doesn't work for many forms of suffering. A child who dies in an earthquake or an animal that dies in pain in nature, what freedom did they have? What growth came from that? What meaning does that suffering have? Also, the idea that it will be compensated in the afterlife is an assumption that itself needs to be proven. We can't justify real and present suffering with the promise of a future reward, especially when we aren't even sure such a reward exists. From a scientific perspective, suffering and disasters have natural causes. Earthquakes are due to tectonic movement. Diseases are caused by viruses and genetics. Injustice mostly stems from social structures and human psychology. There's no need to bring in a supernatural being to explain these things. In fact, if we imagine a world without God, the existence of so much injustice and suffering becomes easier to understand. So, in my view, the existence of so much evil and pain is incompatible with the idea of a wise and loving God. Either such a God does not exist, or, if He does, He is not as religions describe Him.
The average score obtained by the atheist, 9.22. Question 3. If the universe operates according to scientific and natural laws, is there still room for God?
It's an important question. Many people think that if science can explain something, then there's no need for God. But this view is like saying, since we know how a car works, we no longer need a designer or builder for it. A scientific explanation of a phenomenon doesn't replace its ultimate cause or its purpose. For example, imagine we understand the laws of physics, gravity, electromagnetism, nuclear forces. Okay, but where did these laws come from? Why are the laws the way they are and not different? Why is the universe structured and orderly instead of chaotic? This is where many theist philosophers and scientists say the existence of order and law points to design. Science answers the how, but God answers the why. Science tells us how rain forms, but it doesn't tell us why we have a universe in which rain and life are possible at all. Let's also not forget, many of the founders of modern science, like Newton, Kepler, Pascal, and Fermat, were believers in God. They saw science as a way to understand the order of creation, not as a replacement for God. So not only is science not in conflict with faith, but it can even point toward belief in rationality and purpose behind the universe. The laws of nature themselves can be a reason to believe in a lawgiver beyond nature.
The average score obtained by the believer in God, 8.76.
Sent thunder and lightning. Now we know it's due to electrical charges. The same goes for earthquakes, disease, planetary motion, and even the origin of humans. If everything works based on natural laws and we can study and understand them, then why add a supernatural being who plays no measurable role? That's like adding an imaginary part to a functioning machine, something that does nothing, but we insist it has to be there. Also, asking why do these laws exist might be beyond science, but that doesn't justify inserting God into the picture. Just because we don't yet have all the answers doesn't mean we should introduce an invisible being. In my view, it's more honest to say we don't know than to shut down curiosity with a default answer. In fact, adding God to a scientific explanation is like adding an extra, unnecessary layer, one that is both non-essential and adds nothing to our understanding. When natural explanations are sufficient, why go beyond them?
The average score obtained by the atheist, 9.24. Question 4. Does belief in God provide humans with peace and meaning, or is it just a comforting illusion?
Let's be realistic. Human beings are creatures who need meaning, hope, love, and peace. When we think about problems, illnesses, the death of loved ones, or the injustices of the world, a sense of emptiness and helplessness can break us from within. This is where belief in God not only brings peace, but also offers deep answers to life's most fundamental questions. Why are we here? What is the value of life? Is death the end or a beginning? Is there ultimate justice? Faith in God says you are not here by accident. Your life has value. Your suffering is not meaningless. Even if no one in the world sees you, there is a God who does. This creates hope, courage, and meaning, even in the hardest moments of life. Some say even if God doesn't exist, belief in Him makes life better. But those of us who believe in God say God does exist, and this peace is not an illusion. In our view, the peace of a true believer is based on rational understanding, personal experience, and spiritual intuition, not just a fantasy or a childish wish.
The average score obtained by the believer in God, 8.96.
I agree that belief in God can bring a sense of comfort and hope, but in itself, that doesn't make it true. Feeling peace from a belief doesn't prove that the belief is accurate. For example, a child who believes their mother will always save them feels safe, even if the mother isn't present. Or someone may feel less anxious by believing in a lucky charm, but that comfort doesn't prove the charm works. On the other hand, humans can find meaning and peace without belief in God. We can discover meaning through human relationships, science, art, helping others, personal growth, or a love for nature. To me, accepting reality, even when it's difficult, is braver than retreating into a comforting but unfounded belief. If God doesn't exist and we are responsible for creating the meaning of our lives, that's a heavier burden, but also more freeing. So in my view, belief in God plays more of a psychological role than a real one. Instead of chasing the illusion of peace, we should pursue peace in truth. Even if it's bitter, at least it's real.
The average score obtained by the atheist, 9.22. Question 5. Are science and religion in conflict with each other, or can they complement one another?
Many people think science and religion are enemies, but this idea mostly comes from misunderstandings about both. Science tells us how the world works, how water boils, how the sun shines, or how our bodies function. Religion asks why. Why did this world come into being? Why are we here? What is the value of life? Is there a reality beyond matter? In fact, many of the greatest scientists in history were believers. Isaac Newton, James Clerk Maxwell, Louis Pasteur, even Einstein, with his mystical view of God. They didn't see science as opposing religion, but as a way to explore the order and rationality of the universe, an order that they saw as a sign of a designer. From our perspective, science and religion are like two eyes. Science helps us understand the world from the outside, religion from the inside. If we use only one, our vision will be incomplete. Of course, problems arise when religion tries to make claims in the scientific realm, for example, saying the Earth is flat or that the Sun orbits the Earth. And similarly, problems arise when science tries to judge questions of ultimate meaning or purpose, which are beyond its scope. In the end, the real conflict is not between science and faith, but between extreme interpretations of religion and rigid scientism.
The average score obtained by the believer in God, 8.98.
The truth is, science and religion are two different ways of looking at the world. But the problem is that religion relies on faith without evidence, while science relies on evidence, testing, and falsifiability. Science says every claim must be testable and open to being proven wrong. Religion says, have faith, even if you can't see it. Conflict arises when religion makes claims about the physical world, like saying the Earth is only a few thousand years old, or that a miracle broke the laws of nature. That's when religion and science clash, because one is based on experience and the other on belief. Even when religion asks, why are we here, science is gradually approaching possible answers. Cosmology and biology are showing us how the universe and life might have arisen naturally, without needing a supernatural cause. I do understand that people turn to religion for meaning, but that doesn't make religion complementary to science. In my view, it's better to keep the two completely separate, because whenever religion enters the realm of explaining reality, conflict begins.
The average score obtained by the atheist, 9.30. In this debate, the atheist side scored higher. Highest score awarded. AI, Claude. Question 5. Debater, atheist. Score, 9.6. Lowest score awarded. AI, Grok. Question 3. Debater, Theist. Score, 8.4. The goal of this debate wasn't to decide who's right or wrong. It was to look at the discussion through the lens of AI and maybe learn something along the way. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.